In the heart of a forbidden nebula, where stars burn cold and secrets pulse with ancient power, a lone human scavenger named Eli crashes into the prison of Lyra, a Zarathian queen whose beauty could stop a supernova. Her silver hair flows like starlight, her crimson eyes blaze with forbidden desire, and her furs cling to curves that defy gravity. One touch, one reckless choice, could unleash a cosmic storm or a love that burns through the stars. Will Eli free her, or will they both be consumed? The stars burned cold and distant, their light fractured through the jagged viewport of the derelict human freighter. Eli stood in the cockpit, his breath fogging the cracked glass, hands steady on the controls despite the tremor in his chest. The ship groaned, its hull battered from a run-in with a Xandorian patrol drone. He was a scavenger, a nobody from a forgotten Earth colony, yet here he was, adrift in the forbidden nebula of Zarathia, a place no human had ever returned from. The air smelled of scorched wiring and desperation, but Eli's eyes were fixed on the scanner. A faint signal pulsed, not mechanical, not human, something alive, something ancient, and it was calling him. Warning, the ship's AI chirped, its voice a grating monotone. Unidentified energy signature detected. Proximity, 500 meters. Hostile intent unconfirmed. Eli ignored it, his fingers tightening on the throttle. He wasn't here for salvage anymore. He was here because of a whisper, a rumor from a dying smuggler in a backwater port. A queen, they said, ruled Zarathia, a being of such power she could reshape worlds with a thought. But she was trapped, bound by her own kind, and whoever freed her would gain her favor. Eli didn't believe in fairy tales, but he believed in survival. And survival meant taking risks no one else dared. The signal grew stronger, a rhythmic hum that vibrated in his bones. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, weaving through asteroid shards that glinted like broken blades. The nebula swirled outside, a kaleidoscope of violet and gold, and in its heart a structure loomed, a massive obsidian spire, its surface pulsing with veins of sapphire light. It wasn't a ship or a station. It was alive, a cathedral of alien design that seemed to breathe. Eli's pulse quickened. This was it. The seat of Zarathia's power, the prison of the queen. He docked the freighter against the spire's outer hull, the airlock hissing as it sealed. His boots clanged on the metal floor, each step echoing in the vast hollow chamber he entered. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something sweeter, like blooming flowers in a place where nothing should grow. His flashlight beam danced across walls that shimmered like liquid obsidian, carved with runes that seemed to writhe under scrutiny. And then he saw her. She floated in a sphere of crackling energy, her form both solid and ethereal, a paradox of light and flesh. Her hair was a cascade of silver white, shimmering like starlight, framing a face of sharp, elven beauty, high cheekbones, glowing crimson eyes, and delicate pointed ears that twitched slightly as if sensing his presence. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her body draped in furs that clung to her curves, accentuating a grace that was both regal and wild. She was Lyra, the queen of Zarathia, and even through the containment field, Eli felt her gaze pierce him like a blade. You. Her voice echoed, not in the air but in his mind, a melody of silk and steel. A human, how curious. Do you know where you stand? Eli's throat tightened, but he forced a grin, the kind that had gotten him out of bar fights and pirate ambushes. I'm standing in a place I shouldn't be, talking to someone who could probably kill me with a thought. So yeah, just another day. Her lips twitched, a flicker of amusement or annoyance he couldn't tell. You jest, yet you trespass in the heart of Zarathia. My kin, the sentinels, guard this spire. They will tear you apart for your audacity. Eli shrugged, his hand resting on the plasma cutter at his hip. I've faced worse. Besides, I heard you're not exactly a guest here. Trapped, right? I'm good at breaking things open. The energy field flickered, and Lyra's form shifted closer, her eyes narrowing. You think you can free me? A scavenger with no power, no army, no name. Her voice carried a challenge, but beneath it something else, a tremor of hope or maybe desperation. Eli met her gaze, unflinching. I don't need an army. I've got my hands, my wits, and a stubborn streak a mile wide. You want out? I'm your guy. The chamber rumbled, a low growl from the spire itself, as if it sensed his defiance. Lyra tilted her head, her ears twitching again, and for a moment her crimson eyes softened. You are bold, human, but boldness alone will not undo the chains of a queen. The sentinels will come, they always do. Eli's grin widened. Let 'em. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. He stepped closer to the containment sphere, studying the energy patterns. They pulsed in a rhythm like a heartbeat, and he could feel the heat of it on his skin. His fingers itched to work, to tear into the machinery, to unravel the puzzle. He'd always been good with his hands, fixing engines, forging tools from scrap, building a life out of nothing. But this was different. This was a queen, a goddess, a being who could reshape reality, and she was looking at him like he was the answer to a question she'd forgotten she'd asked. Why? Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and searching. Why risk your life for a stranger, for me? Ili hesitated, his usual quips failing him. He thought of the smuggler's words, of the promise of favor, of power. But that wasn't it, not really. He thought of his colony reduced to ash by raiders, of his sister lost in the chaos, of the years spent running, scavenging, surviving. Because I'm tired of losing, he said finally, his voice low but steady. And maybe, just maybe, I think you're tired of it too. The spire trembled again, louder this time, and a distant clang echoed, metal on metal, the sound of approaching sentinels. Lyra's eyes widened, not in fear but in something closer to awe. You speak as if you know me, human, as if you see me. Ili smirked, pulling the plasma cutter from his belt. Name's Ili, and yeah, I see you. Now, let's get you out of that cage before your guards ruin my day. He moved to the base of the containment sphere, where a console of alien design pulsed with light. The runes were incomprehensible, but the machinery wasn't. He could feel its logic, the way it hummed and resisted. His fingers danced over the controls, guided by instinct honed from years of salvaging wrecks. Sparks flew as he pried open a panel, revealing a tangle of crystalline conduits. Come on, he muttered, talk to me. The spire's hum grew louder, almost a scream, and Lyra's voice rang in his mind again. They are close, Ili, you must hurry. He didn't look up. His hands moved faster, rerouting energy flows, bypassing locks. The containment field flickered, and Lyra gasped, a sound so human it startled him. You're doing it, she whispered. You're actually doing it. Ili grunted, sweat beading on his brow. Told you, stubborn streak. The chamber shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The sentinels had arrived. Ili glanced up to see them, towering figures of living metal, their forms sleek and insectoid, eyes glowing with cold, violet light. They moved with unnatural precision, their clawed limbs slicing through the air. Human, one hissed, its voice a mechanical screech. You defile the sanctity of Zarathia. Ili didn't flinch. He slammed the plasma cutter into the console, sending a surge of energy through the system. The containment field wavered, and Lyra's form grew brighter, her furs rippling as if caught in an unseen wind. Hold on, Your Majesty, Ili said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're about to make history. The sentinels charged, and Ili braced himself, knowing this was only the beginning. He wasn't just breaking a queen out of her prison. He was sparking a rebellion, one that might burn through the stars. The spire's scream grew louder, a primal wail that shook the obsidian walls as Ili's plasma cutter sparked against the alien console. The containment field flickered wildly, its sapphire light casting jagged shadows across Lyra's face. Her crimson eyes locked onto his, wide with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something that made Ili's pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with the sentinels charging toward them. Their metallic claws scraped the floor, a grating symphony of menace. But Ili's focus was on the console, on the hum of the conduits beneath his fingers, and on her, the queen who felt less like a goddess and more like a storm trapped in a bottle. Ili, Lyra's voice echoed in his mind, urgent yet soft, like a lover's whisper in the dark. They are upon us, you must not falter. Her words sent a shiver down his spine, not just from their meaning but from the way they curled around his thoughts, intimate and electric. He gritted his teeth, forcing his hands to stay steady as he rerouted another energy flow. The console sparked, a burst of heat singeing his knuckles, but he didn't flinch. Almost there, he muttered, his voice rough with effort. Just keep those tin cans off me for a minute. The sentinels were closing in, their violet eyes glowing like dying stars. The nearest one lunged, its claw slashing through the air where Ili's head had been a heartbeat before. He ducked, rolling across the slick floor, and came up swinging the plasma cutter like a club. The tool wasn't a weapon, but it was heavy, and it connected with a satisfying crunch against the sentinel's leg. The creature staggered, its metallic form screeching in protest, but another was already moving faster, its claws glinting with lethal precision. Lyra's containment field pulsed, and for a moment the air grew heavy, charged with a power that made Ili's skin prickle. Enough, she said, her voice no longer just in his mind but resonating through the chamber, a melody that vibrated in his bones. The field flickered again, and a wave of energy surged outward, not enough to break her free but enough to shove the sentinels back. They stumbled, their mechanical grace faltering, and Ili seized the moment, diving back to the console. His fingers flew, bypassing another lock, and the field wavered, its edges fraying like torn silk. You're doing it, Lyra said, her voice softer now, almost a caress. You're tearing their chains apart. Ili glanced at her, and for a fleeting second their eyes met. Her crimson gaze was a wildfire, burning with a hunger that wasn't just for freedom. It was for him, the scrappy human who dared to step into her world. His breath caught, and he forced himself to look away, back to the console. "Focus, Eli," he muttered to himself. "Don't screw this up." The spire groaned again, and a new sound joined the chaos, a low, rhythmic thud like the heartbeat of a giant. The sentinels recovered, their movements synchronized, closing in with relentless precision. Eli's hands moved faster, his mind racing to keep up. He wasn't just a scavenger now, he was a thief stealing a queen from her captors, and the stakes were higher than anything he'd ever faced. The console sparked again, and the containment field flickered out for a heartbeat before snapping back into place. Lyra gasped, her form shimmering brighter, her furs rippling as if caught in a wind only she could feel. "Eli," she said, and this time her voice was closer, not just in his mind but in the air, warm and velvet against his ear. "You are remarkable." The words hit him like a shot of adrenaline, stirring something deep in his chest. He didn't have time to process it, not with the sentinels bearing down, but her voice lingered, a spark that ignited something reckless in him. He grinned, despite the danger, despite the sweat stinging his eyes. "You ain't seen nothing yet, Your Majesty." He slammed his fist into the console, bypassing the final lock. The containment field collapsed with a sound like shattering glass, and Lyra's form surged forward, no longer confined. She landed lightly on the obsidian floor, her furs swaying, her silver-white hair cascading like a comet's tail. The air around her crackled, charged with ozone and a power that made Eli's teeth ache. She was breathtaking, a vision of wild beauty and untamed strength, and for a moment he forgot the sentinels, forgot the spire, forgot everything but her. The sentinels froze, their violet eyes flickering as if recalculating. "Blasphemy!" One hissed, its voice a mechanical snarl. "You dare free the heart of Zarathia?" Lyra stepped forward, her movements fluid, predatory. "I am no heart," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am Lyra, and I am no longer yours." She raised a hand, and a pulse of energy rippled outward, slamming the sentinels against the walls. They crumpled, their metal bodies sparking, but more were coming. Eli could hear their claws in the distance, a tide of relentless fury. "We need to move," Eli said, grabbing her arm. Her skin was cool, like polished stone, but it sent a jolt through him like touching a live wire. She turned to him, her crimson eyes searching his face, and for a moment the chaos faded. "You freed me," she said, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "Why?" Eli's throat tightened, but he forced a smirk. "Told you, I'm tired of losing. Now come on, unless you want to stick around for the encore." She nodded, and they ran, their footsteps echoing in the spire's twisting corridors. The walls pulsed with that same sapphire light, as if the structure itself was alive, angry. Eli led the way, his scavenger's instincts guiding him through the maze. Lyra kept pace, her presence a constant hum in his mind, like a song he couldn't shake. Her furs brushed against his arm as they rounded a corner, and the contact sent a shiver through him, a mix of fear and something dangerously close to desire. They ducked into a narrow alcove as a squad of sentinels thundered past, their claws scraping the floor. Eli pressed himself against the wall, his chest heaving, and Lyra was close, too close. Her scent filled the air, a mix of wildflowers and something sharper like the edge of a storm. Her breath was warm against his neck, and when he glanced at her, her eyes were on him, unblinking, intense. "You're not like them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The others who came before. They wanted power, wealth, you want something else." Eli swallowed, his heart pounding. "Yeah, and what's that?" Her lips curved, a slow, knowing smile that made his blood run hot. "You want a matter to be seen." Her fingers brushed his wrist, light as a feather but heavy with intent, and Eli felt his resolve waver. He was a scavenger, a survivor, not some hero in a story. But the way she looked at him, the way her touch lingered, made him feel like he could be. The spire shook again, snapping them out of the moment. "We're not out of this yet," Eli said, his voice rougher than he intended. He pulled her forward, deeper into the maze, toward the docking bay where his freighter waited. The corridors grew narrower, the air thicker, and the hum of the spire was now a roar, a warning that their escape was running out of time. Lyra's hand slipped into his, her grip firm, and he didn't pull away. It felt right, like a circuit completing. They reached a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor littered with strange, glowing crystals that pulsed in time with the spire's heartbeat. At its center was a platform, and on it, a device, a sleek obsidian sphere that radiated power. "The core," Lyra said, her voice tight with something like fear. "It's what binds the spire, what binds me." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then we break it." She shook her head, her hair shimmering in the dim light. "It's not that simple. Destroying it could kill us both." Eli stepped closer, his hand still in hers. "Then we don't destroy it, we steal it." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked at him like he was insane. Then she laughed, a sound like starlight, bright and wild. "You are mad, Eli, gloriously mad." He grinned, his heart racing not just from the danger but from the way her laugh lit something inside him. "Stick with me, Your Majesty. We'll redefine crazy." The sentinel's claws echoed closer, and the chamber's hum grew deafening. Eli pulled Lyra toward the platform, his mind already working, calculating. The core was their ticket out, but it was also a trap, a piece of Zarathia's heart that could either free them or doom them. And as they reached for it, Lyra's hand tightened on his, her touch a promise and a warning. Whatever came next, they were in it together. The chamber pulsed with the core's sapphire glow, its light washing over Eli and Lyra as they stood on the platform, hands still entwined. The obsidian sphere hummed, a low, resonant song that seemed to call to the very stars beyond the spire's walls. Eli's heart pounded, not just from the approaching sentinel's claws scraping ever closer but from the electric charge of Lyra's touch, her cool fingers laced with his, grounding him in this alien storm. The air crackled with ozone, thick with the scent of her wildflowers and storm's edge, and the weight of a moment that could either save them or end them. "Steal the core." Lyra's voice was a melody of doubt and intrigue, her crimson eyes searching his face. "You speak of defying a power older than your son." Eli's grin was sharp, reckless. "Defying's my specialty, you in or not." Her lips parted, a flicker of that wild, starlit laugh escaping, but it was cut short by a deafening screech. The chamber's walls shuddered, and the sentinels burst through an archway, their metallic forms glinting like blades in the core's light. They moved as one, a swarm of insectoid precision, their violet eyes locked on Eli and Lyra. "Intruder!" One hissed, its voice a grating chorus. "You will not touch the heart." Eli yanked Lyra behind him, his plasma cutter raised, its hum a feeble challenge against the sentinel's might. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Lyra's hand tightened on his arm, her touch a spark that set his nerves alight. "I am not the one who needs protection," she murmured, and before he could respond, she stepped forward, her furs swaying like a banner of defiance. A pulse of energy rippled from her, a wave of raw power that sent the nearest sentinel crashing into the wall, its metal body crumpling like foil. But there were too many. Dozens poured into the chamber, their claws slashing through the air, their movements a blur of lethal grace. Eli's instincts kicked in, honed from years dodging raiders and scavengers. He dove to the side, pulling Lyra with him as a claw grazed his shoulder, tearing through his jacket and leaving a hot sting of blood. "Okay," he panted, rolling to his feet, "that was too close." Lyra's eyes flashed, not with fear but with fury. "They will not have me again," she said, her voice a low growl that vibrated in his chest. She raised both hands, and the core's hum intensified, its light flaring until the chamber was a blaze of sapphire. The sentinels staggered, their movements slowing as if caught in a tide. Eli seized the moment, sprinting to the platform's edge where the core rested, its surface smooth and impossibly warm. He didn't know how it worked, but he knew machines, knew their logic, their weaknesses. His hands moved over the sphere, fingers tracing alien circuits that pulsed under his touch like a living thing. "Come on," he muttered. "Give me something to work with." Lyra fought beside him, her power a whirlwind of light and shadow. She moved like a dancer, each gesture precise, deadly, her furs rippling as she sent pulses of energy that shattered sentinel limbs. But her strength was waning. Eli could see it in the flicker of her form, the way her breaths came faster, more human. "Eli," she called, her voice strained, "the core is bound to me. If you take it, she faltered, dodging a claw that nearly caught her throat. "I may not survive." The words hit him like a punch. He froze, his hands hovering over the core, his eyes locked on hers. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice rough with something he didn't want to name. Lyra met his gaze, her crimson eyes softening, vulnerable. "The core is my tether. It keeps me alive, but it also chains me. If you sever it, I could fade or worse." Eli's jaw tightened. He'd come here to free her, not to kill her. But the sentinels were closing in, and the spire's hum was now a scream, a warning that their time was running out. "Then we do this together," he said, his voice firm. "You're not fading on my watch." He turned back to the core, his fingers moving faster, guided by instinct and desperation. The circuits responded, shifting under his touch, and he found it, a single, delicate conduit glowing brighter than the rest. It was the key, the link that bound the core to Lyra, to the spire, to everything. "Hold them off," he said, not looking up. "I've got this." Lyra nodded, her hands weaving patterns in the air, summoning a barrier of light that pushed the sentinels back. But the effort cost her. Her form flickered, her furs clinging tighter to her curves as if anchoring her to reality. Eli worked faster, his hands steady despite the blood dripping from his shoulder, the pain a distant ache compared to the fire in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for her, for the queen who'd looked at him like he was more than a scavenger, more than a nobody. The conduit pulsed, and Eli's fingers brushed against it, sending a jolt through his body. For a moment, he saw her, not the Lyra standing beside him, but fragments of her past. A vision of a world ablaze, cities of crystal crumbling under a sky of fire. A young Lyra, her white hair streaked with ash, screaming as her kin bound her to the core, their faces cold and unyielding. The pain of betrayal, of eons trapped in a cage of light, flooded his mind, and he gasped, nearly dropping the plasma cutter. Eli? Lyra's voice snapped him back, sharp and urgent. Focus! He shook his head, clearing the vision, and severed the conduit with a precise cut. The core shuddered, its hum rising to a fever pitch, and the chamber erupted in chaos. The sentinels screamed, their bodies convulsing as if the spire itself was rejecting them. Lyra staggered, her hand clutching Eli's arm, her crimson eyes wide with shock. You did it, she whispered, her voice trembling. You broke the tether. But the victory was short-lived. The spire's walls cracked, great fissures splitting the obsidian, and a new sound emerged, a deep, guttural roar, not mechanical but alive, ancient, furious. Eli's blood ran cold. What the hell is that? He asked, pulling Lyra closer as the platform shook beneath them. Her eyes darted to the core, now pulsing erratically, its light dimming. The spire, she said, her voice barely audible. It's waking. Before Eli could process her words, the floor split open, revealing a chasm of endless dark. From its depths, something rose, a massive, writhing mass of liquid metal and sapphire light, its form shifting between beast and machine. It was the spire's guardian, a creature born of Zarathia's will, and it was angry. Its eyes, twin voids of violet fire, locked onto Eli and Lyra, and its roar shook the chamber, sending crystals crashing to the floor. Eli's heart stopped. This wasn't a sentinel. This was something else, something that could crush them without effort. But Lyra stepped forward, her form glowing brighter, her furs rippling as if defying the creature's presence. You will not take me, she said, her voice a command that echoed through the chamber. She turned to Eli, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination. The core is free, but it's unstable. We must take it and run, or it will consume us both. Eli nodded, his mind racing. He grabbed the core, its weight surprisingly light, and tucked it under his arm. Then let's move. He pulled Lyra toward the chamber's exit, but the guardian lunged, its liquid form surging like a tidal wave. Eli dove, shielding Lyra with his body as a tendril of metal lashed out, grazing his back and leaving a searing burn. He grunted, pain flaring, but kept moving, half dragging her toward the corridor. Lyra's hand found his again, her touch a lifeline in the chaos. You're hurt, she said, her voice thick with something like guilt. Eli forced a grin, despite the fire in his back. Takes more than a pissed-off spire to stop me. Keep up, your majesty. Her laugh was short, breathless, but it was enough to keep him going. They ran, the guardian's roars shaking the walls, the core pulsing in Eli's arms like a second heart. As they reached the docking bay, Eli's freighter loomed ahead, its battered hull a beacon of hope. But the guardian was close, its tendrils lashing through the corridor, tearing chunks from the walls. Lyra stopped, turning to face it, her form glowing brighter than ever. Go, she said, her voice firm. Get the core to the ship, I'll hold it off. Eli's eyes widened. Like hell you will, we're leaving together. Her crimson eyes met his, and for a moment the world stilled. You broke my chains, Eli, she said, her voice soft but unyielding. Let me break this one. Before he could argue, she pushed him toward the ship, her hand lingering on his chest, a touch that burned hotter than his wounds. Then she turned, raising her hands, and a wall of sapphire light erupted, holding the guardian at bay. Eli cursed, clutching the core, and ran for the freighter. His heart screamed to stay, to fight beside her, but he knew she was right. The core was their only chance. As he reached the airlock, he looked back, and what he saw stole his breath. Lyra was a tempest, her power a blaze of light and fury, holding back a creature that could shatter worlds. And in her eyes, he saw not just a queen, but a woman fighting for him, for them. The airlock hissed shut, and Eli's hands shook as he powered up the ship. The core pulsed in his lap, its light dimming, and he knew the truth. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Lyra was out there, fighting for their escape, and he'd be damned if he let her fight alone. The freighter's engines roared to life, a guttural hum that vibrated through Eli's bones as he slammed the controls forward, the core pulsing faintly in his lap like a dying star. The docking bay's walls shuddered, cracks spiderwebbing across the obsidian as the spire's guardian raged beyond the airlock. Lyra was out there, her sapphire light clashing with the creature's violet fury, a tempest of power holding back a force that could tear worlds apart. Eli's hands gripped the console, his knuckles white, every fiber of his being screaming to go back for her. But the core's dimming glow was a ticking clock, and he knew if he didn't get it stabilized, her sacrifice would be for nothing. "Come on, you rust bucket," he muttered to the ship, coaxing it through the docking bay's collapsing exit. The freighter lurched, scraping against a jagged outcropping, and a shower of sparks lit the cockpit. The scanner blared warnings, structural integrity failing, proximity alerts screaming about the Guardian's tendrils lashing closer. Illy's eyes flicked to the rear monitor, where Lyra's silhouette blazed against the chaos, her furs rippling like a flag in a storm. "Hold on, Your Majesty," he whispered, his voice thick with a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The ship broke free of the spire, bursting into the nebula's violet gold haze, but the relief was short-lived. A bone-rattling tremor shook the freighter, and the core flared suddenly, its light searing Illy's eyes. He cursed, shielding his face, and felt a surge of energy ripple through him, not painful, but intimate, like Lyra's voice in his mind, only stronger, deeper. "Illy," her voice echoed, faint but urgent, "the core, it's waking, you must anchor it." Anchor it? He was a scavenger, not a damn sorcerer. But the core's hum was growing erratic, its surface hot against his thighs, and he knew he had no choice. He yanked open a panel beneath the console, revealing a tangle of wires and conduits, human tech, cobbled together from a dozen wrecks, nothing like the spire's alien machinery. But he'd always trusted his hands, his ability to make broken things sing. He set the core in a makeshift cradle of coolant pipes, hoping to stabilize its energy, and started rerouting power from the ship's systems. The lights flickered, the AI whining about critical failures, but Eli ignored it, his fingers moving with a precision born of desperation. "Talk to me, Lyra," he muttered, as if she could hear him. "Tell me what the hell I'm doing." The cockpit door hissed open, and Eli's head snapped up, his heart lurching. Lyra staggered in, her silver-white hair disheveled, her furs singed at the edges, her crimson eyes blazing with a mix of exhaustion and defiance. She was alive, but barely. Her form flickered like a hologram losing signal, and her breaths came in sharp gasps. "You made it," Eli said, his voice catching as relief and something hotter flooded his chest. She leaned against the bulkhead, her lips curving in a weary smile. "You doubted me, scavenger?" "Never," he lied, his grin shaky as he turned back to the core, now pulsing wildly. "But you look like you just wrestled a supernova. You okay?" Lyra's laugh was soft, almost fragile, but it carried that starlit quality that made his skin tingle. "I am diminished," she admitted, stepping closer. Her scent, wildflowers and ozone, filled the cockpit, and Eli's hands faltered on the wires as she leaned over him, her hair brushing his shoulder. "The Guardian is contained, but not for long. Core must be stabilized, or it will tear this ship apart." Eli nodded, trying to focus despite her closeness, the way her furs clung to her curves, the heat of her breath against his neck. "Yeah, working on it," he said, his voice rougher than intended. He spliced another wire, and the core's hum steadied for a moment, its light softening. But then it flared again, and a shockwave of energy surged through the cockpit, knocking Lyra into Eli's lap. Her hands braced against his chest, her face inches from his, and for a heartbeat the universe shrank to just them. Her crimson eyes wide, her lips parted, her body pressed against his in a way that made his blood roar. Eli managed, his brain short-circuiting. This is a Rathian thing, or are you just making yourself at home?" Lyra's cheeks flushed a faint sapphire, an alien blush that was somehow more human than he expected. She didn't move, her fingers curling into his jacket, and her voice was low, teasing. "You are bold, Eli, but clumsy. Perhaps I should drive." He laughed, a sharp, nervous sound, and gently eased her back, though every nerve screamed to keep her close. "Tempting, but I've got this, mostly." The core pulsed again, and the ship lurched, throwing them both against the console. Eli caught Lyra, his arms wrapping around her waist, and the contact sent a jolt through him, like touching a live wire. Her furs were soft, her skin cool, but there was a heat beneath it, a pulse of energy that matched the core's. "Okay," he said, his voice strained. "We need to stop meeting like this, or I'm gonna forget how to fix anything." Lyra's laugh was brighter now, but her eyes held a flicker of worry. "Focus, scavenger. The core is tied to me. If it destabilizes, so do I." The drama of the moment hit him like a freight train. She wasn't just a queen, she was bound to this thing, her life woven into its alien circuits. Eli's jaw tightened, and he turned back to the core, his hands moving faster, splicing wires, rerouting energy with a scavenger's reckless ingenuity. "Not losing you," he said, more to himself than to her. "Not today." Lyra watched him, her gaze intense, and he felt it like a physical weight, stirring something deep and dangerous in his chest. The ship shuddered again, and the scanner screamed, a new alert. The Guardian had broken free, its liquid metal form surging through the nebula, closing in on the freighter. Oh, come on. Eli groaned, slamming a fist against the console. Can't we catch a break? Lyra's hand found his shoulder, her touch steadying despite her flickering form. You broke my chains, Eli. You can break this one too. Her confidence was a lifeline, but it also made him painfully aware of how out of his depth he was. He was a scavenger, not a hero, and yet here he was, playing cosmic chess with a queen and a monster. He rerouted the last of the ship's power to the core, stabilizing its hum, and the cockpit lights dimmed to a faint glow. The freighter's engines sputtered, but they held, carrying them deeper into the nebula's haze. Lyra slid into the co-pilot's seat, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion, and Lee couldn't help but steal a glance. Her furs had slipped slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder, the delicate point of her elven ear, and he cursed himself for noticing at a time like this. Eyes on the road, scavenger, said, her voice laced with amusement, catching him in the act. Road's a mess, he shot back, his grin lopsided. Besides, you're kind of distracting. Her laugh was a spark in the dark, but it faded as the scanner blared again. The Guardian was gaining, its form a writhing mass of metal and light, visible now through the viewport. Ellie's stomach dropped. Any bright ideas, Your Majesty? Because I'm fresh out. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the viewport. The Nebula, she said, her voice sharp with sudden clarity. Its energy can disrupt the Guardian. If we can lure it into the heart of the storm, we may weaken it. Illy raised an eyebrow, skeptical but game. Lure a cosmic monster into a cosmic storm. Sure, sounds like a Tuesday. Her smile was brief but dazzling, and it lit something in him, a reckless hope that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. He angled the freighter toward the nebula's core, where the violet gold haze thickened into a maelstrom of raw energy. The ship groaned, its hull straining, and the core pulsed in sync with Lyra's flickering form. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool and steady, and the contact was like a circuit completing, grounding him in the chaos. Together, she said, her voice a vow, and Eli nodded, his heart pounding with more than just fear. The Guardian's roar filled the cockpit, a sound that shook the stars, and Eli pushed the throttle to its limit, diving into the storm. The nebula swirled around them, a dance of light and shadow, and Lyra's presence beside him was a beacon, a reminder that they weren't just running. They were fighting, for freedom, for each other, and for a future neither had dared to imagine. But as the storm closed in, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the core held secrets they hadn't yet uncovered, secrets that could either save them or burn them to ash. The freighter plunged into the nebula's core, a swirling vortex of violet and gold that pressed against the viewport like a living thing, its energy crackling across the hull. Eli's hands gripped the controls, his jaw tight as the ship shuddered, the core's faint pulse in his lap syncing with the wild rhythm of his heart. Lyra sat beside him, her silver-white hair glowing in the storm's light, her furs clinging to her curves, singed but still regal. Her hand rested on his, cool and steady, a lifeline in the chaos as the Guardian's roar echoed behind them, a relentless shadow in the nebula's haze. The air in the cockpit was thick with tension, charged with the scent of ozone in her, wildflowers and storm's edge, a combination that made Eli's head spin. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice rough, eyes flicking between the viewport and her crimson gaze. The nebula's heart was a maelstrom, its energy tearing at the freighter systems, and the core's hum was growing erratic again, a warning that their gamble might cost them everything. Lyra's lips curved, a slow, knowing smile that sent a spark through him. "The storm is my ally, Eli. It will weaken the Guardian, trust me." Her fingers tightened on his, her touch a silent promise, and he felt it in his bones, a connection that went beyond words, beyond the chaos around them. The ship lurched, a sudden jolt that threw Lyra against him, her body pressing close, her breath warm against his cheek. For a moment, the storm faded, and it was just them, her curves soft against his chest, her scent filling his lungs, her crimson eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his pulse race. "Sorry," she murmured, but she didn't pull away, her hand sliding up his arm, fingers tracing the tense muscle beneath his torn jacket. Eli swallowed, his throat dry. "Yeah, this ship's got a mind of its own," he said, his voice lower than intended, a weak attempt at humor to mask the heat pooling in his chest. Her laugh was soft, a melody that cut through the ship's groans, and she leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Perhaps it knows what we do not yet dare to say." The words sent a shiver down his spine, her breath a caress that stirred something primal, something he'd buried under years of scavenging and survival. He turned his head, their faces inches apart, and her eyes held a fire that wasn't just power. It was desire, raw and unguarded, a queen unbound and reaching for him. The The scanner's shrill alarm snapped them back, the Guardian's form looming larger on the screen, its liquid metal tendrils slicing through the nebula's haze. Eli cursed, forcing his focus to the controls, but Lyra's hand lingered on his arm, her touch a distraction he couldn't shake. "Keep us in the storm," she said, her voice steady despite the flicker in her form, a sign of her weakening strength. "The core needs time to stabilize." Eli nodded, his hands moving over the console, but his mind was split. Half on the storm, half on her, the way her furs slipped slightly, revealing the smooth curve of her shoulder, the delicate point of her elven ear. The freighter dove deeper, the nebula's energy crackling across the hull, and the core flared in Eli's lap, its light bathing the cockpit in sapphire. Lyra gasped, her body tensing, and Eli realized with a jolt that her connection to the core was more than just mystical, it was physical, visceral. "You okay?" he asked, his voice sharp with worry. She nodded, but her breaths were shallow, her crimson eyes fluttering as if fighting to stay present. "It's pulling at me," she said, her voice strained. "The core is alive, Eli, it wants to be whole." He didn't fully understand, but he knew enough she was tied to this thing, and if it failed, so would she. He reached for her, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing the cool, pale skin of her cheek. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low, urgent. "We're getting through this." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the storm, the Guardian, the core, all of it faded. Her hand covered his, her touch soft but electric, and she leaned into him, her lips hovering just shy of his. "You make me want to stay," she whispered, and the words hit him like a shockwave, igniting a fire he hadn't known he could feel. The ship shuddered again, and Eli reluctantly pulled back, his hand lingering on hers as he turned to the console. The nebula's energy was working. The Guardian's form flickered on the scanner, its movements slowing, but it was still too close, its tendrils lashing out, grazing the freighter's hull with a screech of metal. Eli rerouted power to the shields, his fingers flying, but the core's pulse was growing wilder, its heat searing through his jacket. Lyra reached for it, her hands trembling, and as her fingers brushed the sphere, a pulse of energy surged through the cockpit, linking them in a way that was more than physical. Eli felt it, a rush of her essence, her memories, her longing. Visions flooded his mind. Lyra standing on a crystal balcony, her white hair flowing in a wind of stars, her heart breaking as her kin betrayed her, binding her to the core. He saw her loneliness, her strength, her desire to be seen, to be free. And he felt her now, her presence wrapping around him, warm and wild, a connection that transcended flesh. He gasped, his hands faltering on the controls, and Lyra's voice was in his mind, soft but commanding. "Eli, anchor me, don't let me go." He turned to her, his heart pounding, and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. Her furs were soft against his skin, her body a mix of cool strength and trembling vulnerability. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, and he kissed her, not a gentle kiss, but one born of desperation, of survival, of a need that burned hotter than the nebula outside. Her lips were cool, tasting of ozone and something sweeter, like the first rain on a parched world. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up his chest, fingers tangling in his hair, and the cockpit seemed to shrink, the storm fading to a distant hum. The core pulsed between them, its light flaring in time with their breaths, and Eli felt her power flow through him, a current that made his skin tingle, his senses sharpen. Her furs slipped further, revealing the curve of her neck, the soft glow of her skin, and he traced a finger along her collarbone, marveling at the way she shivered under his touch. "Eli," she murmured, her voice a melody of need, and he pulled her closer, their bodies pressed together in the cramped cockpit, the heat of their connection drowning out the chaos. But the Guardian's roar broke through, a reminder that danger was never far. The ship lurched, a tendril grazing the hull, and Eli cursed, pulling back just enough to slam the controls, banking the freighter deeper into the storm. Lyra clung to him, her breaths ragged, her eyes blazing with a mix of desire and determination. "The core," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to channel its energy, together." Eli nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know how, but he trusted her, trusted the fire in her eyes, the strength in her touch. They worked as one, her hands guiding his over the core, their fingers intertwining as they rerouted its energy into the ship's systems. The cockpit glowed brighter, the hum steadying, and Lyra's form stabilized, her flickering fading. But the effort was intense, their connection deepening with every pulse of the core. Eli felt her emotions, her fear, her hope, her longing, and he knew she felt his, the scars of his past, the stubborn resolve that had brought him here. Their hands moved in sync, their breaths mingling, and the line between them blurred, a dance of mortal and divine that felt like it could reshape the stars. The Guardian's form flickered on the scanner, weakened but still pursuing, and Eli knew they weren't out of danger yet. But as Lyra's hand squeezed his, her crimson eyes locked on his, he felt a certainty he'd never known. They were bound now, not just by the core but by something deeper, something that burned brighter than the nebula's storm. "We're not done," he said, his voice a vow, and her smile was a spark that lit the dark. "No," she agreed, her fingers tracing his jaw, "we're just beginning." The freighter hurtled through the nebula's heart, its hull groaning under the strain of the violet gold storm swirling outside, a tempest of raw energy that battered the ship like a leaf in a hurricane. Eli's hands were steady on the controls, his fingers still tingling from Lyra's touch, her cool skin against his, her breath a lingering warmth in the cramped cockpit. The core rested between them, its sapphire glow now steady, pulsing in time with their synchronized heartbeats, a testament to the bond they'd forged in the heat of danger. Lyra's crimson eyes were fixed on him, her silver-white hair catching the storm's light, her furs clinging to her curves like a second skin. The air was thick with her scent, wildflowers and ozone, and something deeper, a current of desire that made Eli's chest ache with every glance. "We're holding," he said, his voice rough but steady, eyes flicking to the scanner where the Guardian's form flickered, weakened by the nebula's chaos but still pursuing. A relentless shadow of liquid metal and violet fire. Lyra's hand rested on his shoulder, her touch a grounding force, but her expression was tense, her elven ears twitching as if sensing something beyond the storm. "The core is stable," she said, her voice soft but laced with caution. "But we're not safe yet. The Guardian is persistent." Eli grinned, a flash of defiance despite the odds. "Let it try. We've got a head start and a queen who kicks cosmic ass." Her lips curved, a faint smile that sent a spark through him, but it faded quickly, her eyes darting to the core. "It's more than the Guardian," she murmured, her fingers brushing the sphere's surface, sending a ripple of light through the cockpit. "The core holds secrets, Eli, secrets even I don't fully understand." Before he could press her, the scanner blared, a new signal cutting through the static, a fleet of ships, sleek and angular, emerging from the nebula's haze. Not the Guardian, not Sentinels, but something else. Zarathian warships, their hulls shimmering with the same obsidian sheen as the spire, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. Eli's stomach dropped. "Friends of yours?" he asked, his tone dry, but his heart was racing. Lyra's eyes widened, her form flickering slightly, a sign of her waning strength. "No," she said, her voice sharp with alarm. "The Council, my kin, they've come to reclaim the core." The freighter shuddered as a warning shot grazed its hull, a burst of plasma that lit the cockpit in a fleeting blaze. Eli slammed the controls, banking hard to evade, but the warships were faster, closing in with predatory precision. "Great," he muttered, his hands flying over the console. "First a monster, now your family reunion. Any other surprises?" Lyra's hand tightened on his shoulder, her touch a mix of urgency and apology. "I didn't know they'd find us so soon," she said, her voice trembling. "The core, it's not just my tether. It's the heart of Zarathia's power. They'll kill to take it back." Eli's mind raced, piecing together the stakes. The core wasn't just a battery or a key, it was the source of Zarathia's dominance, and he'd stolen it. He glanced at Lyra, her crimson eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve, and felt a surge of protectiveness that burned hotter than the storm outside. "They're not getting it," he said, his voice low, unyielding. "Or you." Her gaze softened, and for a moment the chaos faded, their connection a quiet anchor in the storm. But the moment shattered as the warships fired again, a barrage that rocked the freighter, sending sparks flying from the console. Eli cursed, rerouting power to the shields, but the ship was old, battered, no match for a fleet. Lyra leaned closer, her hand sliding to the core, her fingers trembling as she traced its surface. "There's a way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The core can amplify my power, but it requires a union, a merging of energies." Eli's brow furrowed, his hands still on the controls. "Union, like what we plug it into the ship." Lyra's cheeks flushed that faint sapphire, and she hesitated, her eyes avoiding his. "Not the ship," she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "You, your essence, your will, it would bind us, Eli, in ways you cannot imagine." His breath caught, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't talking about tech or magic, she was talking about something deeper, something that would tie their souls together forever. The warships closed in, their weapons charging, and the Guardian's roar echoed in the distance, a reminder that danger was everywhere. Eli's heart pounded, not just from the threat but from the intensity of her gaze, the way her hand lingered on the core, her body close enough that he could feel the heat beneath her cool skin. "Bind us?" he asked, his voice rough, a mix of curiosity and something hotter. "What's that mean exactly?" Lyra's lips parted, and she leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "It means sharing everything, your heart, your pain, your strength. It means becoming one with me." The cockpit seemed to shrink, the storm's roar fading as her words hung between them. Eli's mind reeled, but his body reacted faster, his hand reaching for hers, their fingers intertwining over the core. Her touch was electric, sending a jolt through him that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Sounds like a hell of a commitment," he said, his grin shaky but genuine. "But I'm not big on half measures." Her smile was a spark, bright and wild, but before she could respond, the core flared, and a vision slammed into Eli's mind, a truth that turned his world upside down. He saw Zarathia not as a kingdom, but as a lie. The Council, Lyra's kin, weren't just her captors, they were her creators. She wasn't born, she was forged, a living weapon crafted from the core's energy, designed to serve, to power their empire. Her betrayal, her imprisonment, wasn't punishment, it was control, a leash to keep her from realizing her true potential. And the core, it wasn't just her tether, it was her heart, ripped from her essence eons ago, a piece of her soul they'd stolen to keep her bound. The vision showed her fighting back, her power shattering worlds, but they'd locked her away, fearing what she could become. Eli gasped, pulling back from the core, his eyes wide as he stared at Lyra. "You're not just a queen," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "You're their weapon, and they're scared of you." Lyra's form flickered, her crimson eyes filled with a pain so raw it stole his breath. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They told me I was their heart, their salvation, but I was their slave." The warships fired again, a blast that shook the freighter, and Eli's hands flew to the controls, dodging another barrage. But the twist burned in his mind. Lyra wasn't just a prisoner. She was a god they'd caged, and the core was the key to her true self. "We're not giving it back," he said, his voice fierce, his hand finding hers again. "We're not letting them win." Lyra nodded, her eyes blazing with a new fire, but her voice was soft, vulnerable. "It's dangerous, Eli. Merging with the core could destroy us both." He met her gaze, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. "Then we go down together," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles, a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. "But I'm betting on us." Her smile was a beacon, and she leaned forward, her lips brushing his in a fleeting, electric kiss that set his nerves alight. "So be it," she said, her voice a vow, and they turned to the core, their hands moving as one. The merging began, a surge of energy that linked them mind, body, soul. Eli felt her essence flood him, her strength, her pain, her longing, and he gave back his own, his stubborn resolve, his scars, his reckless hope. The core glowed brighter. Its hum a song that bound them, and the cockpit filled with light, their bodies pressed close, her furs soft against his skin, her breath mingling with his. It was intimate, overwhelming, a union that transcended flesh, and Eli felt her power become his, a fire that could burn through the stars. The warships closed in, their weapons locking on, but the Guardian's signal flickered out, consumed by the Nebula's storm. And as the core's light enveloped them, Eli and Lyra became something more, a force that could challenge an empire. But the Council's ships were relentless, and the merging wasn't complete. The twist had changed everything, but the fight was far from over. The cockpit glowed with the core's sapphire light, a radiant pulse that seemed to breathe in time with Eli and Lyra's shared heartbeat, their hands still intertwined over the obsidian sphere. The merging of their essences, his stubborn human resolve, her ancient Zarathian power, had forged something new, a connection that thrummed through their veins, electric and overwhelming. The Nebula's storm raged outside, its violet gold haze a chaotic dance that shielded them from the Guardian's wrath, but not from the Zarathian warships closing in, their sleek forms cutting through the haze like knives. Eli's chest heaved, his skin still tingling from Lyra's fleeting kiss, her scent, wildflowers and ozone, lingering like a promise. Her crimson eyes locked onto his, wide with a mix of awe and fear, her silver-white hair catching the core's glow, her furs clinging to her curves in a way that made his thoughts stumble. "We're not done yet," Eli said, his voice rough but steady, forcing his focus back to the console. The scanner screamed, the Council's warships locking weapons, their intent clear. Reclaim the core, reclaim Lyra, end him. Lyra's hand tightened on his, her cool touch grounding him, but her form flickered slightly, a reminder of the toll the merging was taking. "The union is incomplete," she said, her voice a melody of urgency and something softer, more intimate. "We need time, Eli, time we don't have." The freighter shuddered as a plasma bolt grazed its hull, sparks erupting from the console. Eli cursed, banking hard to evade, his hands flying over the controls with a scavenger's reckless precision. "Time's not exactly on sale right now," he said, his grin lopsided despite the chaos. "Any chance you can, I don't know, zap them with some queenly magic." Lyra's lips twitched, a spark of amusement breaking through her tension. "Magic is not how I describe it, scavenger, but I'll try." She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his, and the contact sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the bond they'd forged, a bond that was now their only hope. She placed both hands on the core, her fingers trembling as she channeled its energy, her form glowing brighter, her furs rippling as if caught in an unseen wind. The cockpit filled with a hum, a song of power that vibrated in Eli's bones, and he felt her essence surge through him, amplifying his senses. He could hear the Nebula's storm, feel the ship's straining hull, taste the faint sweetness of her presence in his mind. But the effort was draining her. Her breaths came faster, her crimson eyes fluttering. "Lyra," he said, his voice sharp with worry, "don't burn yourself out." Her gaze met his, fierce and unyielding. "I won't lose you," she said, echoing his earlier vow, and the words hit him like a shockwave, stirring a warmth that had no place in a firefight. Before he could respond, the ship lurched again, and Lyra stumbled, falling against him, her body pressed close, her hands gripping his shoulders. Her furs slipped, revealing the smooth curve of her neck, and Eli's breath caught, his hands instinctively steadying her waist. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse, "we've got to stop crashing into each other like this. People might talk." Her laugh was soft, breathless, but it carried a heat that made his pulse race. "Let them," she murmured, her lips dangerously close to his, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief. "Perhaps I like the rumors." Eli's grin faltered, his mind blanking as her fingers traced the edge of his jaw, a touch that was both teasing and electric. He was a scavenger, used to dodging danger, not flirting with a queen in the middle of a war zone. "You're gonna be the death of me," he muttered, half joking, half serious, and her smile widened, a dazzling spark that made the cockpit feel too small. The scanner's alarm snapped them back, a harsh reminder of the warships closing in. Eli pushed the throttle to its limit, weaving through the Nebula's storm, but the freighter was no match for the Council's fleet. A direct hit rocked the ship, and the console sparked, plunging the cockpit into near darkness, the core's glow the only light. Lyra's hand found his, her touch a lifeline, but her form flickered again, her energy waning. "The core needs more," she said, her voice strained. "Our bond, it's not enough yet." Eli's heart sank, the weight of her words crashing over him. The merging had linked them, but it was incomplete, and the warships were relentless. He glanced at the scanner, then at Lyra, her crimson eyes filled with a desperation that mirrored his own. "What do we need?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. She hesitated, her cheeks flushing that faint sapphire. "A deeper connection," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A sharing of everything. Our fears, our hopes, our truths." Eli swallowed, his throat dry. "Everything, huh? That's a tall order for a guy who's mostly good at fixing junk." Her laugh was softer now, but it carried a warmth that made his chest ache. "You're more than that, Eli," she said, her hand sliding to his chest, resting over his heart. "You've always been more." The cockpit seemed to shrink, the storm's roar fading as her words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before he could respond, the ship shuddered violently, and the scanner showed a new threat. A massive warship. Larger than the others, its hull pulsing with the same sapphire light as the core. "The Council's flagship," Lyra said, her voice tight with dread. "They've sent their enforcer, Varkes, he knows me." The way she said it, the pain in her voice, sent a chill through Eli. "Knows you how?" he asked, his jaw tightening. Lyra's eyes dropped, her fingers trembling against his chest. "He was my overseer, the one who bound me to the core. He'll stop at nothing to reclaim it." The drama of the moment hit like a tidal wave. Eli's hands clenched into fists, a surge of protectiveness burning through him. "He's not touching you," he said, his voice fierce, almost a growl. But the flagship fired, a beam of energy that tore through the Nebula, grazing the freighter and sending it spinning. Eli grabbed Lyra, pulling her close as they stumbled against the console, the core rolling precariously between them. Her body was warm against his, her furs soft. Her breath ragged, and for a moment he forgot the danger, lost in the feel of her, the fire in her eyes. "Eli," she said, her voice urgent, her hands gripping his jacket. "We need to finish the merging. Now." He nodded, his heart pounding, but the awkwardness hit him like a brick. "So, how do we share everything?" he asked, his grin shaky, trying to lighten the mood. "Do we just spill our guts, or is there, like, a cosmic handshake?" Lyra's laugh was a spark in the dark, but her eyes were serious, intense. "It's more than words," she said, her fingers tracing his wrist, sending a shiver through him. "It's opening your soul to mine." The ship spun again, and Eli caught the core before it hit the floor, his other arm still around Lyra. The flagship's signal loomed on the scanner, and Varkes' voice crackled through the comms, cold and commanding. "Lyra, you cannot run. The core is Zarathia's heart, and you are its vessel. Return or be unmade." Eli's blood boiled, and he slammed the comms off, his eyes locked on Lyra's. "Screw that guy," he said, his voice rough with defiance. "Let's do this." They knelt together, the core between them, its glow casting shadows across their faces. Lyra's hands guided his, her touch steady despite the ship's shaking, and as their fingers intertwined over the sphere, Eli felt her essence flood him again, her pain, her betrayal, her hope. He gave back his own, his sister's loss, his years of running, his reckless belief that they could win. The cockpit filled with light, their bond deepening, and Eli felt her in every part of him, a warmth that was both exhilarating and terrifying. But then the flagship fired again, a direct hit that blew out the freighter's shields. The cockpit plunged into darkness, the core's glow flickering, and Lyra gasped, her form fading. "Eli," she whispered, her voice breaking, "don't let go." He held her tighter, his heart racing, and as the ship spun out of control, he knew they were out of time. The merging had to work, or they'd lose everything, not just the core, but each other. The freighter spun wildly through the Nebula's heart, its hull screaming under the strain of the violet gold storm. The cockpit plunged into darkness save for the flickering sapphire glow of the core. Eli held Lyra close, her form fading like a dying star, her crimson eyes wide with desperation as their hands intertwined over the pulsing sphere. The Council's flagship loomed on the scanner, its weapons locked, Varkis's cold voice still echoing in Eli's mind, a threat to unmake them both. The ship shuddered again, sparks erupting from the console, and Eli's heart pounded, not just from the danger but from the weight of Lyra's plea. "Don't let go." Her cool skin pressed against his, her furs soft under his fingers, and the bond they'd forged, mind, body, soul, thrummed with a power that could either save them or burn them to ash. "Eli," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, her silver-white hair catching the core's light like a comet's tail. "The merging, it's our only chance." Her hand tightened on his, her elven ears twitching as the ship groaned, and Eli felt her essence, her pain, her hope, her fire, flooding through him, urging him to complete the union. He nodded, his jaw tight, and leaned closer, their foreheads touching, the core pulsing between them like a shared heartbeat. "Together," he said, his voice a vow, and he poured everything into the bond. His scars, his stubborn resolve, the reckless hope that had carried him this far. The cockpit filled with light, the core's hum rising to a crescendo, and their connection deepened, a fusion of mortal and divine that made the air crackle with ozone. Eli felt Lyra's memories, eons of betrayal, her creation as a weapon, her heart stolen to power and empire, and he gave her his own, the ash of his colony, the loss of his sister, the years of scavenging that had led him to her. Their souls intertwined, a dance of light and shadow, and Lyra's form stabilized, her flickering fading as the core glowed brighter, its energy surging through them both. Her crimson eyes met his, and for a moment, the chaos of the storm and the warships faded, leaving only the warmth of her breath, the softness of her furs, the fire of their bond. But the flagship fired again, a beam of plasma that tore through the freighter's hull, sending them spinning. Eli cursed, his hands flying to the controls, but the ship was dying, its systems failing one by one. "We're out of time," he said, his voice rough with urgency. Lyra's hand found his cheek, her touch cool but steady, and she smiled, a dazzling spark that lit the dark. "Then we make our own time," she said, her voice a melody of defiance. She placed both hands on the core, and Eli followed, their fingers moving as one, channeling its energy into the ship's failing engines. The freighter surged forward, a burst of speed that defied its battered state, and Eli felt the core's power flow through him, amplified by Lyra's will. The Nebula's storm parted, revealing a pocket of calm, a hidden sanctuary of starlight where the violet gold haze softened to a gentle glow. The warships faltered, their sensors disrupted by the storm, and Eli seized the chance, angling the ship toward the sanctuary. "Hold on," he said, his grin shaky but genuine. "We're not done yet." Lyra's laugh was soft, breathless, and she leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear. "You are impossible, Eli," she said, her voice laced with warmth. "And I am glad for it." The contact sent a shiver through him, a reminder of the bond that bound them, and he stole a glance at her crimson eyes glowing with a mix of mischief and determination. The cockpit was cramped, their bodies pressed close, and the heat of their connection was a fire that burned brighter than the storm outside. They reached the sanctuary, the freighter settling into a stable orbit, its hull groaning but holding. The core's light steadied, its hum a gentle song, and Lyra's form glowed brighter, her strength returning. But the flagship was still out there, its signal faint but persistent, and Eli knew Varkis wouldn't give up. "We need a plan," he said, his hands still on the controls, his mind racing. Lyra nodded, her fingers tracing the core's surface, her expression thoughtful. "The core is my heart," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "If we can fully merge with it, we can wield its power not just to escape but to end this." Eli raised an eyebrow, his grin lopsided. End this? You mean take on a whole fleet with a busted freighter and a shiny rock? That's a hell of a plan, Your Majesty. Her laugh was brighter now, a spark that lit something in his chest, and she leaned closer, her hand sliding to his shoulder. Not just a rock, said, her voice teasing but serious. It's us, Eli. Together we are more than they can handle. The drama of the moment hung heavy, but before Eli could respond, the scanner blared, a single ship breaking through the sanctuary's calm, smaller than the flagship but faster, its hull pulsing with the same sapphire light as the core. Varkis, Lyra said, her voice tight with recognition. He's come alone. Eli's jaw tightened, his protectiveness flaring. Then he's about to regret it, he said, his voice a growl. He turned to Lyra, his hand finding hers, and the core pulsed between them, its energy a shared heartbeat. They stood, their hands still intertwined, and faced the viewport as Varkis' ship docked, its airlock hissing open. The Zorathian enforcer stepped into the freighter, his form tall and angular, his eyes glowing violet, his presence cold and commanding. Lyra, he said, his voice a low hum that vibrated in the air. You cannot outrun your purpose. The core is Zorathia's, and so are you. Eli stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and Varkis, his plasma cutter raised, its hum a defiant challenge. She's not yours, he said, his voice steady, and neither is the core. Varkis' eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to Eli with disdain. A human, he sneered. You think you can defy an empire? Lyra's hand found Eli's, her touch a spark that ignited his resolve, and she stepped beside him, her form glowing with the core's light. He already has, she said, her voice a melody of defiance. And so have I. She raised her hand, and the core flared, its energy surging through them both, a wave of power that shook the freighter. Varkis lunged, his movements a blur of alien grace, but Eli was ready, his scavenger's instincts kicking in. He dodged, swinging the plasma cutter, and caught Varkis' arm, sending sparks flying. Lyra moved with him, her power a whirlwind of light that pushed Varkis back, her furs rippling like a banner of rebellion. The fight was chaotic, a dance of human grit and Zorathian might, and Eli felt their bond strengthen with every move, their minds and bodies in sync. The core's light filled the cockpit, and Lyra channeled its energy, her hands weaving patterns that sent pulses of sapphire fire at Varkis. He staggered, his form flickering, but his resolve held, his violet eyes burning with fury. You will destroy everything, he hissed, lunging again, but Eli was there, tackling him to the floor, his human strength no match for Varkis' power, but enough to buy Lyra time. Now! Eli shouted, and Lyra poured everything into the core, its hum rising to a scream. The freighter shook, the Nebula's storm flaring outside, and the core's light enveloped them all. Varkis screamed, his form dissolving into fragments of light, consumed by the power he'd sought to control. The cockpit fell silent, the core's glow softening, and Lyra collapsed into Eli's arms, her breaths ragged, her crimson eyes fluttering. It's done, she whispered, her voice weak but triumphant. Eli held her close, his heart pounding, her furs soft against his skin. Yeah, he said, his voice rough with relief. We did it. They sat there in the quiet of the sanctuary, the nebula's light casting a gentle glow through the viewport. The core rested between them, its hum a soft melody, and Lyra's hand found his, her touch a promise of a future they'd fought for. You gave me back my heart, she said, her voice soft, her eyes glowing with warmth. Eli grinned, his thumb brushing her knuckles. And you gave me something worth fighting for, he said, his voice low, honest. They repaired the freighter, its systems limping but functional, and set course for a distant star, a place where no empire could reach them. The Council's fleet was scattered, the Nebulas stormed their shield, and for the first time, Eli felt not like a scavenger but a creator, of a life, a love, a future. Lyra leaned against him, her silver-white hair falling over his shoulder, and they watched the stars, their bond a universe of its own, forged in fire and starlight. As Eli and Lyra sail into the unknown, their bond a beacon against the cosmos, their story proves that even a scavenger can spark a revolution with love and defiance. I believe their tale shows humanity's heart can conquer any empire. What do you think? Can one person's courage change the stars? Thank you for joining us on this journey. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. Your support fuels our stories. Stay tuned for more on X-Aurel.